The Zelda series is famous throughout the gaming industry for many things, and one key element the series has continuously been praised for is its boss encounters. Challenge, character, mechanic, scale, they have all the boxes ticked. So why does Breath of the Wild's bosses, for lack of a better word, suck? The 4 main bosses of the game are basically identical Ganon spawns, with the final boss being Calamity Ganon. And they're all pretty terrible fights. Now, these fights might be rather open and allow you to drop your enemy in any way you see fit, but that also means I can just bring a stack of ancient arrows to a blight and defeat it without moving. It's not all terrible as far as bosses go, but it's definitely a downgrade when compared to the series past. However, Breath of the Wild did bring overworld bosses to Hyrule, which is an amazing addition to the game. But then again, there are only 3 overworld bosses and they get kinda repetitive really quick. So you start to see the reason why bosses in Breath of the Wild aren't really that good. Let's go back down the checklist. Challenge. I think this clip can speak for that one. Character. From the blights to the overworld bosses, the repetition is obvious. None of the game's bosses for the most part really stand out outside of Master KOHGA and Maz Koshia. Mechanics. With the absence of items, this area struggles. There are some instances though, like with Thunderblight Ganon, where we can still find an engaging fight. Scale. Molduga is probably the closest we get to a towering threat, but even then it pales in comparison to some of the series' greats. So the performance isn't great. When I put Breath of the Wild side to side with any other Zelda game's bosses, I would most likely always pick the latter. So how does and will the sequel fix this? Because as we just established, as much as I love it, Breath of the Wild's Air of Freedom doesn't translate well into boss battles. I believe there are 2 ways to fix this problem. Number 1, hone in on the diversity of both the main and overworld bosses. The best bosses in Breath of the Wild are the most unique ones. I mean, look at Monk Maz Kyosha. I think this alone would solve a lot as far as boss battles go in Breath of the Wild 2. And I also think it's the most likely of the 2. Number 2 being, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah, I personally think the best way to improve bosses in Breath of the Wild 2 is to just strip away a lot of the freedom you had in how you defeat them. Basically, just return to what Zelda bosses used to be because they were already great. You can continue to have overworld bosses work in the same way with multiple ways to vanquish them, but as far as main obstacles of the game, I think stepping back a bit to what bosses were before is the best route forward. So that's what I think the Zelda team should do with bosses in Breath of the Wild 2, but we're still forgetting something, aren't we? Oh yeah, the actual bosses, because if I have to see 4 identical looking blights again, I will not be okay. Now, of course, the simplest way to find bosses for Breath of the Wild 2 is just by looking at all the creatures introduced as bosses over the past 19 games of the series. Bring back Georg as an overworld boss you randomly encounter off the coast. Have a side quest about an ancient dragon terrorizing people, ending with a fight against Argarok. Reintroduce one of my favorite boss fights, Mogera, as a dungeon boss. The list goes on and on. Reusing the series' backlog of monsters alone would be enough to make a game full of fun boss fights. But I've had some more original ideas for what Breath of the Wild 2 can do with bosses I'd also like to share. Remember this piece of concept art? Well, if you don't, lucky you. These originate from the first release of Breath of the Wild's concept art book in Japan, Masterworks. According to their description, they were early designs for Guardians that were scrapped. But I think they could be so much more. Imagine you're exploring an underground dungeon in Breath of the Wild 2, you get to the boss room, walk in, and it's just this 15-foot tall thing staring at you. It doesn't move, but when you circle around it, its head twists as it stays centered on you. Only when you go up and hit it will it scream and the battle starts. Come on guys, look at the potential here. Another thing I really want to see in the sequel is a large-scale battle. I look at this giant world of Hyrule and I think to myself, I want to have a battle with a giant enemy and, you know, kind of Shadow of the Colossus style. That would be cool, wouldn't it? There is a precedent for this as well, actually. The battle with Twin Mold and Majora's Mask, and in a game I feel basically served as a basis for building Hyrule in Breath of the Wild, Xenoblade Chronicles X, where there is an amazing boss battle against a giant foe over the span of one of the game's continents. My final idea for bosses I want to talk about today is the idea of there being a second set of bosses in Breath of the Wild 2 outside of monster dungeon battles. It's kinda rare in the Zelda series to be put in a fight against a humanoid character, but from what I've seen, for the most part, those battles seem to play out rather well. I've been playing through Ghost of Tsushima recently, which in of itself has a lot of really smart gameplay systems that seem like they could have been ripped straight out of Breath of the Wild, and seeing them here now just makes me ponder why they weren't in Breath of the Wild. But that's a discussion for another day. One thing I've really been enjoying about Ghost is duels, where you have a one-on-one sword battle with a single opponent. And playing through these sections, I kept thinking to myself, Zelda should have more battles like this. And that's how the idea for the Generals of Ganondorf was born. I don't only want to see fun boss fights against a variety of monsters in Breath of the Wild 2, but I'd also love to see duels against humanoids as well. The only problem is that there are usually not a lot of people on the side of darkness in Zelda. Sure, there are some exceptions, but for the most part, the evil legions of Hyrule consist of mindless monsters. So I got to thinking, and I came up with the concept of Ganondorf's Generals. Basically a group of undead warriors that now serve Ganon and play a role in the plot of Breath of the Wild 2 as Ganondorf attempts to conquer Hyrule with an undead army. This way we get the opportunity for more humanoid duels and new villains. As you continue through the game's story, you will defeat monsters as dungeon bosses and encounter plenty of overworld bosses as well. But Ganondorf's Generals will also face you at key points in the story until eventually only Ganon is left. It's kind of an idea built on little evidence. I mean, nothing here says anything about conquest or a group of generals, but it's something that I just thought would be a fun idea. And if it means we get even more fun fights in the form of duels, I thought it might be worth sharing. Breath of the Wild might not have the best bosses in the Zelda series, but there is definitely potential there. To fix that in the sequel by returning to more traditional boss encounters or even just increasing the variety, I have high hopes of some memorable fights to come out of the sequel. And I can't wait to see what it has in store. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, make sure you subscribe. I get happiness points when you do that, so always a good thing to do. Let me know your guys' ideas in the comments, you know? Because we have so many ideas here. Everybody has ideas. They're all different, you know? Just get them out there. Hopefully one of us is right, and then we can brag about it when we finally do learn more about the game. So, you know? What do you think about the bosses? What are we going to see? If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button. Subscribe again. Just twice. Just do it twice. Actually, 3 times, so then you're still subscribed, you know? And have a wonderful day. I will see you guys next week. Big video coming, so get excited for that one, and have a great day. Bye.